Hi, I'm here with Andrew Scott Howman in my old law firm of Bell Gully. It's great to be back. Andrew's head of the employment unit here at Bell Gully, does a lot of sports law, but mainly runs the employment team. And Andrew, most people watching this will be mediators. And what would really be helpful, given that you spend so much time in mediation, and you'll tell us why in a minute, but give us, choose 2 or 3, 4 things that precisely you either like or dislike about what mediators do. That would be very helpful, I think.
Well, it's a pleasure to do that, and hello to everybody. Let me start by explaining the context in which I can offer you these comments. Here in New Zealand, we operate under a statutory scheme in employment law which makes it compulsory to go to mediation as the first stop to any employment problem. And what that means is, in the usual course of things, you find yourself in mediation within 1 or 2 weeks of a problem arising. Now, practically, for us here in Wellington, there are a pool of probably 4 or 5 mediators and a very small bunch of employment lawyers in town. So that means our paths cross regularly. And the starting point is to let you know that with the comments I'm about to offer, I have I hope, a reputation with the mediators and know the mediators very well by my experiences through them regularly. The first thing I offer to you is effectively part of that relationship is I find it very important to have trust in a mediator, and I'm sure that works the other way as well, that the mediators find it easiest to work with people that they trust as well. And what I like about having that level of trust is the ability to confide and to let the mediator do his or her job the way it's intended to be.
And Andrew, how does a mediator build trust with you? Because often, when I'm meeting someone for the first time, you've got a couple of hours to build that trust, and it is a challenge for a mediator.
I don't know that there's any substitute for time and experience, but let me give you a real example of what I'm talking about. The first phase of mediation is almost inevitably a session for venting, of airing issues, and personally I like the client to do that rather than me, because it seems a lot more genuine when you hear the person affected actually talking about it. When you get to the second phase, when you get the mediator in the room with you, and you have that moment where you're able for the first time to speak to him or her alone, I find the mediation far more effective if you're able to say, now look, we've worked together many times, and I can tell you honestly, what we've got today is X and Y, and our real interests are these different things. And I want to tell you that now because I'm happy to take guidance from you as to how we can best get to that end point.
Yeah.
But I want you to know immediately that's the outcome we want. And in my experience, those are the most effective mediations, because then you cut through a lot of the game playing that can otherwise go on. A lot of that sort of sparring of the person not really wanted to disclose interests until a later point. And let the mediator do his or her job by then going into the other room armed with that knowledge and able to come back with a suggestion that's far more helpful than otherwise.
And you're happy to let the mediator use that knowledge as he or she sees fit over the day?
And that's a factor of respect and experience that I've never had a mediator let me down on that front. I'm sure if that had happened, I'd be less inclined to do that in the future. And I guess, Jeff, that's a good point to pick up. My second point, I actually prefer it when a mediator takes control in a mediation, and I know that may sound a kind of odd thing because inherently it's a facilitative type of environment. Let me distinguish it. I don't like a mediator that offers judgments and says this is what the outcome should be. But in that first phase where the parties are effectively exchanging their views and stating their case, I think it's actually helpful for a mediator to take some element of control and say, this is the way the mediation should run, and I want to hear from you, and this is what I think would be helpful for me to hear, and these are the boundaries that I think we should...
That's very interesting for us, because I hear myself saying, and I kick myself under the table, saying things like, look, the only thing I decide is what time we're having lunch, so you're sort of a wet bus ticket, really. But so you like us to be more than a process guide and actually be in control.
Well, let me give you a real-time example, and I think this was a recent mediation in which I was involved. A complicated case involving many claimants and multiple issues. And at the very beginning of mediation, we couldn't decide who should be in the room to start with. We knew we had to get through these different issues and different people had to be there at different times. But we couldn't agree between the two sides who should be there to start with. What we could agree, however, is that we were happy for the mediator to decide.
Right.
So in other words, Madam Mediator, you can make the decision as to how we kick things off. And at that point, our mediator was the wet bus ticket you've described. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable making a decision like that.
Even when you'd given her the authority?
The authority to do so. And even where our law in New Zealand allows the parties to empower the mediator to make a decision on process like that.
Yes, this is the employment legislation as opposed to wider.
That's right. And she felt that that was so unusual, she didn't want to start the mediation off by asserting her authority. Yet the way I'd sort of liken it is it's not unlike the mother of the warring siblings being asked to make a determination, and each of us likes that element of structure and respect. And I know, because I have a lot of regard for the person on the other side, the lawyer on the other side of that dispute, we both would have managed to live with whatever she'd said. It's just we needed guidance and couldn't either of us concede to the other's view. So it seems to me that you've got to be careful in the way that you do it. But being assertive is not a bad thing if that's what the parties are asking.
Yes, and I think a lot of us struggle with the balance of being assertive and facilitative, and not wanting to sort of tread on your toes.
Well, let me pick up on that. It's probably the third thing that I'll say. We've only had our current mediation system under our employment legislation for 6 years. And when it began, there was a real perception of reluctance to engage mediators who weren't legally qualified. And now, 6 years on, I honestly can't remember the mediators that have law degrees and those that don't. And it doesn't enter into my thinking as to who the best mediator is for a particular circumstance. The reason for that is my bad experiences of mediation tend to be those in which a mediator turns from a facilitator of discussion to a judge. And I'm sure that comes as no surprise to any of you.
Ian Gordon, who's on one of these clips, said exactly the same thing a couple of weeks ago. It was just unhelpful.
It very much is. It's one thing to say very helpfully, well, if you don't settle, here are the areas of exposure that I can see. But it's another to say, well, my view and my experience of being a lawyer is you're likely to lose and to have to front up with such money and so forth. That tends to drive parties into their corners and to lose respect for the mediator and for the mediation to fall apart, because there is a winner from that process, and that's not the idea.
Look, that's very helpful. We're just about out of time, so thanks, Andrew. And could we get you along again with some more tips and techniques?
Happy to come along.
Great.
And be happy.
Great. I'll just try and... No, just